Adding external effects and outboard gear to your music setup can be a really great source of inspiration. It can change the way that you approach making music, help you make new sounds and textures, and just be a way to mix up your music production. Coming from a guitar background, I've had various guitar pedals and effects over the years, but I've never really integrated it into my workflow as a music producer. So more recently, I started selling all of the old pedals and gear that I don't use anymore, and using that to be a bit more selective about the effects that I use so I can integrate them with my music workflow. And on top of that, I've purchased my first outboard synth, which I'm really excited to be using as well. So I thought I would just make a quick video to demonstrate a few of my favorite outboard effects and how I use them, how I integrate them with my DAW, which is Ableton, and just the best methods of doing so that I've found so far. So yeah, firstly, I'm just going to talk about the best way that I've found to integrate external effects into your music production workflow. So quickly, it's worth mentioning that the power supply that I use for the pedals is the One Spot Pro. And then really just to cover probably a boring part, but one of the most important parts of my effects chain is this radial reamp box. And what this does is it takes the line level signal from my DAW and it lowers it to be suitable for guitar pedals, and then raises it back up again, sends it back into my DAW. So I've got 2 stereo tracks coming out of the DAW into this, and then 2 stereo tracks coming out of this back into the DAW. And then I can use the effects loop to start adding effects into the mix. So with this, I've got a send and receive here, and then a dry and wet and effects loop. So I can turn the effects loop off if I've got pedals coming out of it, and I'll just get a clean signal, or I can turn it back on and it'll start to go through the effect. And the great thing about this is I've got a dry wet knob. So if I'm playing guitar into the back of this, I can adjust how much of the guitar is processed by the pedals and how much of the pedal sound is processed as well. And then plus you've got a send and receive level if you want to adjust that, and you've got a switch there to invert the phase. So it's a piece of equipment that's probably not fully necessary for the Microcosm or the BigSky. If you want to use stuff like analog guitar pedals, like this Fender compressor pedal, which I use quite a lot on my guitar, then you need to be able to reamp the signal so it's not too loud for the effects pedal. So it's probably also worth mentioning that a lot of the effects for guitar pedals are just mono, because guitar is mono. For example, the Microcosm has got a mono input but a stereo output, and the BigSky has got a stereo output and a stereo input. And then stuff like the Fender compressor pedal, which is purely a guitar pedal really, that's just got a mono input and a mono output. So if you've got a stereo signal coming into the reamp box, generally I just use the left channel of the stereo input into the mono pedals. And then if I really want to, I can get 2 of the same pedal, or just bounce the left track and then bounce the right track and put them back together. But if you do anything like try and combine the left and the right track in a mono form, you can start getting some phase issues. So I tend to avoid doing that. So if you've never done this before, I'll just show you how the sends work in Ableton. So first you need an audio interface, ideally with 2 sends and 2 receives minimum. The more the better, because otherwise you're going to have to start unplugging things and plugging stuff back in. And all you need to do is go into Ableton and have a track. It could be a MIDI track or an audio track that you want to send out to the pedals. And the way I do it is I use the external audio effect, which is just in the standard Ableton effects. And you can click audio output and you go to whatever output you need to go to. And then if it's not showing there, you can click configure and go on to output configure and click whichever one you need to. So you click on your output, it could be stereo 1 and 2. You can adjust the gain for the output on how much you want to send to the effects. And then you get another track, which is going to be an audio track now. And you change the input to whatever the input's going to be. So for me, it's always 5 and 6. So the way I did it in this, it means that I've got my guitar track, which was the introduction guitar. And I sent that out to the Microcosm and recorded completely wet the return, which is this. And then I've got the fully wet track, fully dry track, and I can combine them. So it's as simple as that. Just make sure you turn off the send, otherwise you won't hear it. So just going to explain a little bit more about the pedals that I have used in the video. So I've decluttered and I started off my new pedal board with 2 pedals that have got a incredible reputation and they really live up to the hype. The first one is the Microcosm. You heard that on the guitars in the introduction track, and it's effectively a granular synthesis pedal. So like the sort of plugins like Portal and Crystallizer, it's got the element of adding sort of chaos and randomness to tracks in such a beautiful way. It reinterprets the audio using things like delays and reverbs, but also all sorts of additional effects like glitch sounds, granular delays, micro loops, all sorts of crazy things are happening in the Microcosm, and you get some amazing sounds that I'm only just really starting to discover. But yeah, I would highly recommend checking out the Microcosm. And then you also heard me use the BigSky, which I applied to some of the drum textures and to the synth lines, and I'll talk about the synth in a second as well. But BigSky is possibly one that a lot of people have already got. It's just a bit of a legend in the reverb pedal world, and it's pretty clear why after messing around with it for just a few days. It's got your typical sort of hall and plate and spring reverbs, but on top of that there's loads of sound design things. I really love the shimmer effect, and there's all sorts of pitch shifting reverbs, swells and crazy soundscapes that you can make with this. So this is another one that I would highly recommend, and I can see this becoming such a key part of my workflow. And then finally, you also heard some synth sounds in this track, and they were from my Novation Peak synth, which is my first sort of outboard synth. It's actually a digital synth with a really high resolution, but it's got some onboard analog effects as well, and I'm loving playing around with the sounds for this. I sort of initially bought it to use in a new alias that I'm working on, making more sort of housey electronica beats, which I will play in the background now, a demo of my first single. That is not out yet, I'm probably still going to work on it a little bit more. But yeah, so that's why I bought it, but I found it works really well for like ambient and soft sounds as well. So I love adding the textures from it into lo-fi beats as well, which I've done on a few of my upcoming lo-fi singles. And I know you can map effects to controllers and stuff in your DAW, but there's something about having more of like an analog outboard effect and filters and delays and distortions that give it such a warm, gritty sound and are really satisfying to use. I'm not really sure whether anyone here would be that interested in finding out more about the synth. Do let me know in the comments down below if you are. I know it may not necessarily be sort of fit into everyone's sort of lo-fi instrument vision, but yeah, if you want to know more about it, or if you want sounds from it and samples from it, I can definitely drop some of them for free on the channel as well. But do let me know if you want to hear more about that. But yeah, in terms of connectivity, all I'm really doing is going from the stereo outputs on the synth into my DAW. And then again, for MIDI control, I've got my MIDI keyboard linked up to my DAW, which is then sending MIDI to the synth. And it's also sending the tempo to the synth because a lot of the effects are tempo sensitive. So yeah, I can nicely have my keyboard controlling Ableton as well as the synth. But yeah, I just wanted to briefly overview what I'm doing with the output effects and how I'm using them. I'm not 100% sure whether it's the right sort of content for this channel, but I would love to know what you think and if it's something you'd be interested in seeing more of. But yeah, as always, thanks for watching and see you next time.